There's a moment in your spiritual journey when something inside of you shifts. You no longer see God as a distant figure, someone you turn to only in times of trouble or need. Instead, you begin to crave His presence. You long for His voice, His guidance, His reassurance in every part of your life. This is not just a passing feeling or a temporary burst of faith. It is a deepening hunger, a pull toward the divine that cannot be ignored. And when this happens, you are growing closer to God. It starts subtly. Perhaps you wake up in the morning and instead of reaching for your phone, you pause. You take a moment to thank God for another day. You feel a sense of gratitude welling up in your heart before you even get out of bed. Throughout your day, you notice how often you find yourself thinking about Him, not just in difficult moments, but in the ordinary ones too. You start to invite Him into your daily routine, acknowledging His presence in your work, your conversations, your decisions, and then prayer changes for you. It stops feeling like a duty or a ritual, no longer just a set of words spoken before meals or bedtime. Instead, prayer becomes a conversation, a real dialogue with your Creator. You find yourself speaking to Him more often, not just when you need something, but simply because you want to. And just as much as you talk, you begin to listen. You start to recognize His voice, not in a booming, audible way, but in the stillness, in the gentle nudges, in the clarity that comes when you are quiet before Him. Worship, too, takes on a new meaning. It is no longer just about singing songs in church or raising your hands during a service. Worship becomes something personal, something intimate. You realize that worship is not just an action, but a posture of the heart. It is a way of life. You find yourself worshiping in ways you never expected, through the way you work, the way you love others, the way you carry yourself through challenges. You see, worship in moments of surrender, in acts of kindness, in choosing to trust God even when circumstances say otherwise. And then there's His Word. The Bible, once something you read out of obligation or habit, now speaks directly to your soul. Verses that you have read many times before suddenly come alive with new meaning. You find comfort in His promises, strength in His commands, and wisdom in His teachings. You no longer see the Bible as just a collection of stories. You see it as God's voice, His very breath speaking into your life. And because of this, you hunger for more. You want to go deeper, to understand Him more fully, to see how His truth applies to your everyday life. But it's not just about what happens in your quiet moments with God. This deepening desire for His presence begins to affect the way you see the world. You start to notice Him everywhere, in the beauty of creation, in the kindness of a stranger, in the way He orchestrates events in your life. What once seemed like coincidences now feel like divine appointments. You begin to recognize His hand at work in ways you never saw before. And as you grow closer to Him, your heart begins to change. The things that once captivated you, that once distracted you, start to lose their grip. You no longer feel satisfied by what the world offers because your soul craves something deeper, something eternal. You find that the things of God, His love, His presence, His truth, are the only things that truly satisfy. But make no mistake, this journey is not without its challenges. There will be moments of struggle, moments when your faith is tested, when God seems silent and you wonder if you are truly drawing closer to Him at all. But even in those moments, something within you refuses to turn away. You have tasted His presence, and you cannot go back to living without it. You press on, even when it's hard, because you know He is with you. And you have felt His love, and you know it is real. This is what it means to grow closer to God. It is not about perfection. It is about pursuit. It is not about never failing. It is about always returning. It is about a heart that longs for Him above all else, a heart that desires Him not just for what He can do, but for who He is, a heart that recognizes that nothing in this world compares to being in His presence. And if you are feeling this pull, if you are sensing this hunger, Take heart. God is drawing you near. He is calling you deeper. He is inviting you into a relationship with Him that is not just about religion, but about intimacy. He wants you to know Him, to experience His love in a way that transforms you from the inside out. So lean in. Seek Him with all your heart. Make room for His presence in your life, and watch as He begins to reveal Himself to you in ways you never imagined. Because when you desire God above all else, you will find Him, and in finding Him, you will discover the very purpose and fulfillment your soul has been searching for. When you are growing closer to God, something begins to shift inside of you. It's not just about how much you pray or how often you read your Bible, though those things are important. It's about transformation. It's about the way your heart starts to change, the way your perspective begins to shift, the way you begin to see life, people, and even your struggles differently. This change isn't something you force. It happens naturally as you spend more time in His presence. One of the clearest signs that you are drawing closer to God is that your desires begin to align with His. The things that once captivated you, the distractions, the temptations, the fleeting pleasures of the world start to lose their hold. You no longer crave the approval of people the way you used to. You no longer chase after things that once seemed so important but now feel empty. Instead, your heart longs for what God desires. You find yourself wanting what He wants. You want to live righteously, not because you are trying to be perfect, but because you love Him. You want to please Him, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. It's not that you stop struggling or that temptations disappear, but you become more aware. You start to recognize the things that pull you away from God, and instead of excusing them or justifying them, you begin to let them go. You begin to choose Him over everything else. And when you do slip, when you do fall short, you don't run away from Him in shame. Instead, you run toward Him because you know He is merciful, because you know His grace is enough. And as your desires shift, so do your priorities. You begin to seek God first in all things. He is no longer an afterthought or just a part of your life. He becomes the center. Your decisions are no longer based solely on what benefits you, but on what honors Him. The way you spend your time changes. The things that used to consume you, the endless distractions, the constant need for entertainment, the mindless scrolling through social media, those things begin to lose their grip on you. Instead, you find yourself wanting to spend more time in His presence, not because you have to, but because you genuinely desire it. And then something even deeper happens. Your heart starts to reflect His. You begin to love people differently. You start to see them the way God sees them. You develop a compassion that wasn't there before. You no longer hold on to grudges as tightly. You no longer respond in anger as quickly. You start to extend grace even when it's undeserved. You begin to forgive more easily, not because it's easy, but because you realize how much you've been forgiven. This kind of change is not something that happens overnight. It's a process, a journey. There are days when you feel like you're making progress, and then there are days when you feel like you've taken 10 steps back. But even in those moments, you sense that something inside of you is different. Even when you struggle, even when you fall, you don't stay there as long as you used to. You get back up. You keep moving forward. You keep seeking Him. And as you do, you begin to experience a peace that doesn't make sense, a peace that is not based on circumstances, but on the presence of God in your life. The things that used to worry you, that used to stress you out, don't affect you the same way anymore. It's not that challenges disappear, but you face them differently. You trust Him more, you surrender more, you worry less because you know who holds your future. And then there's the joy. A joy that isn't tied to what's happening around you, but to the one who is within you. A joy that remains even in the midst of trials. A joy that cannot be stolen by setbacks or disappointments. It's a joy that comes from knowing you are loved, knowing you are chosen, knowing that God is with you no matter what. This is what happens when you grow closer to God. Your desires change, your priorities shift, your heart softens, your faith strengthens, your peace deepens, your joy overflows. You begin to reflect Him in ways you never imagined. And as you continue to seek Him, He continues to transform you from the inside out. When you are truly growing closer to God, you start to develop a sense of spiritual discernment that wasn't as strong before. It's as if a veil has been lifted and you begin to see things more clearly, not just in the physical sense, but in the spiritual. You recognize the difference between what is from God and what is merely a distraction. You start to perceive the motives behind people's words and actions, sensing when something is genuine and when it is not. You become more aware of the spiritual battles that take place around you, realizing that not everything is as it seems on the surface. This discernment isn't something you gain overnight. It develops as you spend more time in God's presence, reading His Word and listening to His voice. The closer you grow to Him, the more you understand His ways, and the easier it becomes to recognize when something is leading you toward Him or away from Him. You no longer make decisions impulsively. Instead, you seek His guidance. You pause before speaking. You think before acting. You pray before deciding. You are no longer led by your emotions alone, but by the wisdom that comes from God. And as you grow in discernment, you start to notice a shift in your relationships. Some people who were once close to you may begin to distance themselves. Others may even turn against you. At first, this can be painful, but then you realize that God is protecting you. He is removing people from your life who are not meant to go where He is taking you. It becomes clear that not everyone can handle the person you are. Not everyone will understand your transformation. Some will try to pull you back into old habits, old ways of thinking, and old patterns, but your discernment helps you recognize these situations before they take hold of you. You also begin to see how God brings the right people into your life, people who encourage your faith, who challenge you to grow, who remind you of His promises when you start to doubt. These relationships are different because they are built on something deeper. They are not based on convenience or superficial connections, but on a shared pursuit of God. You realize that as you grow in Him, He is aligning you with those who are walking in the same direction. Another powerful change that happens as you develop spiritual discernment is that your appetite for truth increases. You are no longer satisfied with half-truths or surface-level understanding. You want to know what God is truly saying. You start to test everything against His Word. You no longer just accept what people say about God. You go to Him directly. You seek His wisdom rather than relying solely on the opinions of others. And because of this, you are not easily deceived. You are not swayed by every new teaching or trend. You become rooted in truth, and that foundation keeps you strong even when everything around you is shifting. This discernment also changes the way you see yourself. You start to recognize the lies you once believed about who you are, the insecurities, the doubts, the feelings of unworthiness. These things begin to lose their power over you. You see yourself through God's eyes. You understand your worth in Him. You realize that your identity is not based on what others think, not based on your past mistakes, not based on how much you achieve, but on who He says you are. This changes everything. You walk with a confidence that is not arrogance, but assurance. You no longer seek validation from the world because you know you are already accepted by God. As this spiritual discernment grows, you also become more sensitive to the voice of the Holy Spirit. You recognize when He is prompting you to move, when He is urging you to wait, when He is leading you in a certain direction. You begin to trust His timing, even when it doesn't make sense. You start to see how He has been guiding you all along, even in the moments that felt like detours. You become more obedient even when obedience is difficult. You step out in faith even when you can't see the whole picture. And as you walk in this discernment, you experience a deeper level of peace. You are no longer as easily shaken by life's uncertainties because you know who is in control. You are no longer confused by every challenge that comes your way because you understand that some battles are spiritual and not everything is meant to be fought with human strength. You pick your battles wisely, you move differently, you stand firm in your faith, not because life is easy, but because you know that God is with you. This is the beauty of drawing closer to God. Your discernment sharpens, your wisdom deepens, your confidence in Him strengthens. You begin to navigate life with a sense of clarity that you never had before, and with each step you see His hand guiding you, protecting you, and leading you exactly where you are meant to be. When you are growing closer to God, one of the most profound signs is a shift in your priorities. The things that once consumed your time, energy, and focus no longer hold the same power over you. You begin to desire what aligns with God's will rather than what simply satisfies temporary wants. Your heart starts to change, and with it the way you approach life. At first, this shift can feel subtle. Maybe you find yourself wanting to spend more time in prayer, not because you feel obligated to, but because you crave that connection with God. You start to enjoy reading His Word in a way you never did before, as if it's no longer just words on a page, but nourishment for your soul. Worship becomes more than just singing songs. It becomes an expression of gratitude, a moment of intimacy with God that brings you peace even when life feels uncertain. As your priorities shift, so does your definition of success. The world teaches that success is measured by status, wealth, achievements, and recognition. But when you grow closer to God, you realize that true success is not about how much you accumulate, but about how much you align with His purpose for your life. You start to care less about impressing people and more about pleasing God. You're no longer chasing after things that will eventually fade away. Instead, you seek things that have eternal value. This change in priorities is often met with resistance from those who don't understand your journey. People who once related to you may start to feel disconnected. Some may question why you're spending more time in prayer, why you're setting different boundaries, why you're no longer interested in the same conversations or activities. Some might even accuse you of changing too much or becoming too spiritual. But deep inside, you know this transformation is necessary. You are being refined, your focus is shifting to what truly matters. And as you let go of old priorities, God begins to replace them with new ones. You develop a deeper concern for others, not just in a casual sense, but in a way that moves you to action. You start to care about people's souls, their struggles, their salvation. You become more patient, more compassionate, more willing to extend grace because you recognize just how much grace has been extended to you. You no longer look at people through a lens of judgment, but through the eyes of love. Even those who have hurt you, you begin to see differently, not as enemies, but as people in need of God's transformation just as much as you were. Another remarkable change happens in the way you handle challenges. In the past, setbacks, disappointments, and delays might have left you feeling discouraged or even hopeless, but now you see them differently. You start to trust that God is in control, even when things don't go the way you planned. You understand that every delay has a purpose, every closed door is protection, and every difficulty is an opportunity for growth. You are no longer quick to complain, but instead quick to pray. You are no longer anxious about the future because you know God is already there preparing the way. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. There will still be moments of struggle, moments when you wonder if you're truly on the right path. But even in those moments, you find a sense of peace that you never had before. You realize that peace isn't the absence of problems, it's the presence of God in the middle of them. No matter what happens, you know you are not alone. You start to see God's hand even in the smallest details, reassuring you that He is guiding your steps. As your priorities shift, your prayers also begin to change. You no longer just pray for material things or immediate relief from difficulties. Instead, you start to pray for wisdom, for strength, for God's will to be done in your life. You ask Him to remove anything that is not meant for you, even if it's something you once thought you wanted. You surrender more, trust more, and rely on Him in ways you never did before. And the more you align your heart with God's will, the more He reveals His purpose for your life. He starts to place new desires in your heart, dreams and visions that align with His kingdom. You realize that the gifts and talents He has given you are not just for your personal success, but for a greater purpose. You begin to walk in obedience, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't make sense to others. And as you take those steps of faith, you see how God opens doors you never could have opened on your own. This transformation is not always easy. It requires letting go of what is familiar, stepping out in faith, and trusting that God's plan is better than your own. But the more you embrace it, the more you realize that there is nothing more fulfilling than walking in alignment with God. The things you once thought were important start to fade, and what remains is a heart that desires Him above all else. That is when you know you are truly growing closer to God. When your desires change, when your priorities shift, when your faith deepens, and when your life begins to reflect His presence in every decision you make.